Good afternoon and welcome to IBA News this Tuesday, the 5th of July. I'm Elon Aslan-Levy, joining you live from Jerusalem. Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta today welcomed Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu with an elaborate state reception at State House in Nairobi. Accompanied by his wife Sarah, Netanyahu began his visit to Kenya by laying a wreath at the mausoleum of the late Jomo Kenyatta. He then held talks with the Kenyan president and took part in a joint meeting of leading Israeli and Kenyan businessmen. The Prime Minister stressed that his goal is to broaden Israel's relations with African countries, which could help combat growing anti-Israel sentiment in the international arena and even eliminate the so-called automatic majority against the Jewish state in international fora. Speaking today, Netanyahu said terror continues to be a serious threat to peace and international security and called on his African counterparts to help in the fight against terrorism.
There is a raging battle of terrorists from ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab. All these groups are attacking our world and Africa. Where Israel can and has helped and will help more is in many areas, but one area that will make sense to all of those listening to us is that if you know in advance that an attack is going to take place, and you can preempt it and you can prevent it, that is a tremendous and direct assistance to the saving of lives, innocent lives. Israel is doing this across a very wide canvas, and we will share cooperate our intelligence with our friends in Kenya and Africa.
In the last hour, the Times of Israel has confirmed reports that Prime Minister Netanyahu met recently with the president of Somalia. Israel does not have formal diplomatic relations with the Muslim nation. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has called reports of a police investigation against him nonsense. Speaking to reporters during his 5-day visit to Africa, the Prime Minister said every time he embarks on a historic visit abroad, reports arise of a police investigation against him. A Channel 2 report last night claimed that police are conducting a probe concerning suspicions that Netanyahu received illegal funding from business people abroad during his current tenure as Prime Minister and dating back to 2009. The latest allegations come just weeks after Netanyahu rejected reports concerning suspicions that he had failed to report large sums of money he allegedly received for his 2009 election campaign from French billionaire Arnaud Mimran. Netanyahu's office at the time called the claims an absolute lie, but later admitted that he received $40,000 from Mimran in 2001 when he was a private citizen. It has been cleared for publication that Hamas continues to build tunnels underneath residential buildings and mosques inside the Gaza Strip. The Shin Bet security agency arrested 2 Palestinians suspected of transferring funds from Hamas operatives in Gaza to the West Bank. During their interrogation, the 2 revealed the locations of the tunnels as well as the locations of rocket launching pads. The army has issued a demolition order against the family home of 17-year-old Palestinian terrorist Mohammed Turaira, who fatally stabbed 13-year-old girl Halel Yafa Ariel as she slept in her bed in her Kiryat Arba home last week. IDF forces and members of the civil administration handed Turaira's relatives the order informing them of the pending demolition at their Bani Naim home last night. Meanwhile, a 30-year-old woman suffered light facial injuries after her car was hit with rocks as she drove on Road 60 north of Kiryat Arba today. She was evacuated to Shaarei Tzedek Hospital in Jerusalem. The Haifa District Court today sentenced Iman Kanju, a 44-year-old mother of 5 from Shfar'am, for trying to join the Islamic State. She was sentenced to 22 months in prison. According to her indictment, Kanju tried to enter Syria through Turkey, where she was arrested by Turkish authorities and transferred to Israel. The woman was convicted of contacting a foreign agent and illegally leaving the country. Kanju also received a 1-year suspended sentence and a 30,000 shekel fine. More on Syria. An errant mortar shell from Syria has exploded in an open area on the Israeli side of the northern border fence in the northern Golan Heights. No injuries or damage were reported. 2 other explosions heard were likely from shells falling on the Syrian side. Last night's incident occurred a day after the IDF struck 2 Syrian military targets in response to stray Syrian fire that hit areas close to Israel's northern border security fence. It's not the first time that errant fire has spilled over into Israel, whether from rebel forces or the Syrian army. A statement issued by the army this morning said the IDF is not involved in the fighting in Syria, but is determined to protect and respond to any unusual incident. UN Secretary-General Ban Kimoon expressed his deep disappointment over Israel's approval of plans to build some 800 new housing units in Jewish neighborhoods in Jerusalem and beyond the Green Line. He did not refer to the plans for additional housing for Arabs in East Jerusalem. Saying settlements are illegal under international law, the UN leader called on the Israeli government to halt and reverse the decision in the interest of peace and a just final status agreement with the Palestinians. The new construction plans were also criticized by Peace Now, which monitors settlement building.
Netanyahu government decided to promote another 800 units in the West Bank in East Jerusalem and another 40 in Kiryat Arba, Hebron. This is not an answer to terrorism. It is not going to save even one Israeli person. It is just a policy that is meant to destroy the possibility of peace. The true answer for terrorism is making peace and ending the occupation.
Lars Farborg Andersen is the European Union ambassador to Israel. He joined President Rivlin on his recent visit to the European Union Parliament, and he joins me now in the studio to debrief. Ambassador, welcome.
Good afternoon.
Presidents Rivlin and Abbas returned recently from high-profile visits to Brussels. Is it fair to call their visits a success?
Yeah, I think so, very much. If you take Mr. Rivlin's or President Rivlin's visit, I think it's confirmation of the very strong relationship between the European Union and Israel, something that the President also very strongly underlined during his visit. There are so many areas in which we cooperate in our mutual benefit. And even in the areas where we don't exactly see eye to eye on the issues, I think it was a very helpful visit. President Rivlin had many concrete suggestions on how to move forward with small steps on the ground in order to increase confidence between the parties. And this is exactly the approach that the Quartet has adopted, as you will know, also with the recent Quartet report.
Excellent. Well, President Abbas refused to meet President Rivlin in Brussels and reportedly even changed his hotel reservation when he discovered they were staying at the same hotel. Is this the behavior of a partner for peace?
Well, as you know, it was President Martin Schulz, the President of the European Parliament, who tried to broker this meeting. He failed to do that. I think it was a bit of a missed opportunity. But obviously...
Missed opportunity is putting it lightly. Why do you think President Abbas refused to meet the Israeli president?
Well, I don't know. All we were told was that he was not ready to do that. And, you know, we can only take note of that. But as I said before, personally, I feel it was a missed opportunity.
Look, this was an invitation issued directly by the European Union. Does the fact that President Abbas rebuffed a European Union invitation just to talk to the Israeli president change your attitudes about this president's willingness to make a serious peace with Israel?
No, I think as we have made very clear on many occasions, it takes two to tango. And it's absolutely vital that both parties engage and is also seen as engaging. And on that note, I think it would have been a helpful step had the two presidents been able to meet now that they were in Brussels at the same time.
We also heard news today, according to Arabic media, that President Abbas plans to sever ties with the Quartet. How does this impact the European Union's attitude towards him?
Well, I have read that newspaper article as well. We still have to see whether this is actually in accordance with the facts. Obviously, the Quartet will continue to engage with the parties. The Quartet, after all, is the main international interlocutor on this issue. So even though the parties may not always agree on the recommendations and the analysis put forward by the Quartet, I don't think that there's any serious alternative for any of the parties to engage with the quartet.
Okay, well, when President Abbas addressed the European Parliament, he famously accused certain rabbis of urging Israel to poison Palestinian wells, an allegation he later retracted, but MEPs still gave him a standing ovation. Do you condemn their decision to give him a standing ovation?
Well, I think that it's the practice in the European Parliament that whenever they host guests, you are showing the guest respect by standing up. They did exactly the same thing with President Rivlin, even though...
But all the same, he stood and asked and repeated an old medieval libel. Is it too difficult to say we draw a red line here and will not accept such statements in the European Parliament?
Well, I mean, that's entirely up to the European Parliament, which is, as you know, an independent institution. The point I'm making is that there were probably also parliamentarians who didn't appreciate what was being said by President Rivlin, and I think they stood up also afterwards. I mean, it's not an endorsement of the content of what's being said. It's simply a gesture of politeness and respect when people travel long distances to come and speak to the parliamentarians. They reciprocate by showing respect for people. That being said, I have noted also with satisfaction that President Abbas has retracted his comments subsequently.
Okay, well, looking forward, Prime Minister Netanyahu has repeatedly called on President Abbas to return for direct bilateral negotiations without preconditions. Why does the European Union support the French peace initiative instead of simply pressuring Abbas directly to take up the Prime Minister's invitation?
Because I think experience has shown that the parties are not capable on their own to reach a stage where they are able to sit down and negotiate.
But the Prime Minister's invited him to negotiate.
There is a need for a third-party involvement, and I think that the Paris conference was a recognition of that fact, that there was need for international focus on this issue that has been somewhat dormant, I mean the peace process, for some time, and I think this was the motivating factor behind the French initiative, coupled with the fact that we are seeing a constant deterioration of the situation on the ground, bringing us further away from a two-state solution rather than closer to.
Ambassador, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
Drama in the skies today. An El Al flight from New York landed safely at Ben Gurion International Airport this afternoon after a bomb threat provoked the French and Swiss air forces to scramble fighter jets to escort the Israeli plane through their airspace. According to reports, an anonymous bomb threat was received while the El Al aircraft was flying over France, sending the French jets into action. Palestinian Authority officials announced this morning they will not allow some 500 truckloads of Turkish aid to enter the Gaza Strip until further notice, citing the Eid al-Fitr holiday as the reason, even though it's yet to start. It appears humanitarian aid has become a pawn in a power struggle between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. On Sunday, a Turkish ship docked at the port of Ashdod, where Israeli security officials inspected the goods and loaded them onto trucks for the Kerem Shalom crossing. The Turkish boat, carrying some 11,000 tons, was the first dispatched by Ankara, days after it signed an agreement with Jerusalem to restore ties. As part of the understandings, Israel refused to lift the naval blockade on Gaza, but agreed that humanitarian aid supplies from Turkey could transit through the port of Ashdod after inspection. Prior to the PA announcement, a Turkish Red Crescent representative sounded optimistic that the aid would reach Gazan families.
This is the first ship after the Turkish and the Israeli government agreement. It will be also continuously regular humanitarian assistance. We will distribute these humanitarian goods inside across Gaza by Palestine Red Crescent.
The Education Ministry has announced its intention to incorporate studies on Ethiopia and Ethiopian heritage into the school curriculum, making it a mandatory subject for pupils in elementary and high schools. The studies will explore the various waves of immigration to Israel and what Ethiopian Jews seeking Aliyah were forced to endure before arriving in the Jewish state. Monday's announcement came a day after dozens of demonstrators were detained by police after they blocked portions of the Ayalon highway to publicly protest what they described as the oppressive treatment members of the Ethiopian community receive at the hands of Israeli authorities. In finance, shares are down on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange and the shekel is mixed, with the pound continuing its post-Brexit referendum plunge to a new 31-year low. In weather, tomorrow will be hot with a rise in temperatures above the average for this point in hot early July. That's all for today. Laura Cornfield will be back tomorrow. I'm Elon Aslan Levy, wishing you a good evening live from Jerusalem.